Everyone assumes I encouraged Mark because I wanted him, but the truth is I let that kiss happen because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. My husband David has been documenting every millimeter of space between us for 3 weeks, building his case like a prosecutor collecting evidence. What nobody understands is that the real betrayal didn't happen at the office Christmas party. It started 2 months earlier when David handed me the burner phone. I'm going to explain every single detail, including the part about the private investigator David hired to catch me not cheating, and why my fingerprints are on the contract that hired her. The ceramic mug felt wrong in my hands that morning, too heavy somehow, and I kept staring at the hairline fracture in the handle while David read the news across from me. We'd been married 7 years, and somewhere around year 5, the silence had learned to speak louder than words. He'd started tracking my cycle on the kitchen calendar, marking the days with tiny red dots I wasn't supposed to notice. When he suggested I wear my red silk dress to the office party, the one that makes your collarbones look expensive, he said, I should have recognized the calculation in his voice. Instead, I felt grateful for the compliment, the way a stray cat feels grateful for any scrap of attention. My boss Karen had been making comments about my domestic complacency for months, suggesting I needed to rebrand my personal life if I wanted the promotion. Mark from marketing had started lingering by my desk after the Henderson account landed, bringing peppermint tea exactly how I liked it, his fingers brushing mine when he handed over the cup. I told myself it was just workplace friendliness, that I was being paranoid. David had been working late every night that November, coming home smelling like whiskey and printer ink, his jaw tight with something he wouldn't name. The night before the party, he stood behind me while I did the dishes, his hands on my shoulders like he was measuring their width for a coffin. Make sure you have fun tomorrow, he whispered, pressing his thumb into the soft space between my neck and shoulder blade until I gasped. I took a screenshot of Mark's calendar invite, pre-party brainstorming my office, 5 p.m., and texted it to David without thinking, wanting to show him I had nothing to hide. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji within seconds, and I should have noticed how prepared he seemed, how ready. When I showed up at Mark's office at 4:55, he already had 2 glasses of scotch poured and a playlist of jazz standards that David also favored. The dramatic irony tastes bitter now, how blindly I walked into frames that had already been hung. Mark talked about synergy and creative partnerships, his knee resting against mine under the small conference table, and I didn't move away because David had trained me not to make scenes in professional settings. At 5:47, Mark leaned forward and said, "Your husband doesn't appreciate what he has." And the phrasing was so specific, so carefully rehearsed that I felt ice water in my veins. I laughed it off, said David was just stressed, and Mark's smile was knowing when he replied, "Maybe you need someone who sees you right now, not who you used to be." That line was in the affidavit later, word for word, which is how I know Mark was wearing a wire. The first questionable thought came unbidden. Maybe David wanted me to do this. Maybe this was some perverted test I was supposed to fail. I drank the scotch too fast, felt the burn as permission, and when Mark suggested we head to the party together, I said yes because saying no would require explaining why, and I had no explanation that made sense even to myself. The ballroom was all twinkling lights and forced merriment, the kind of expensive corporate joy that feels like a cage made of tinsel. David texted me at exactly 7:30, having fun, with a winky face that he'd never used in 7 years of marriage. I showed Mark the text, laughing about how my husband was checking up on me, and Mark's expression flickered with something I misread as jealousy. By 8:15, we danced twice, his hand resting in the small of my back where David's hand used to rest before it became a fist. When Mark pulled me into the hallway outside the restrooms, I went willingly, drunk on scotch and the dangerous feeling of being seen. The kiss itself was brief, clinical almost, his mouth tasting of cinnamon and conspiracy. I pulled back after 3 seconds that would cost me everything, mumbling something about being married, about this being a mistake. Mark's eyes were cold when he said, "Are you sure it's a mistake, Sarah, because your husband seems to think you need this?" The first small consequence hit immediately. My phone buzzed with a text from David, "Good girl, now come home." I stared at it, trying to make the words rearrange themselves into something less monstrous. Mark watched me waiting, and I realized this wasn't an affair starting. It was evidence being collected. Karen cornered me by the coat check, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mark seems quite taken with you," she observed, her eyes tracking my blush with predatory interest. "A little office romance can be so career-accelerating." She winked, and I felt the ground dissolve beneath my feet. This was part of it too, the public dimension, the witnesses. When I got home at 9:45, David was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. He'd been logging my location every 15 minutes, had screenshots of my texts with Mark, had timestamps. "We need to talk about your behavior," he said, not looking up, and his voice was the same one he used to discuss grocery lists. That's when I learned about the lawyer, about the retainer he'd paid the day before the party. Not a divorce lawyer, a civil attorney specializing in alienation of affection suits. David was going to sue Mark for damages, claiming Mark had destroyed our marriage. The truth bomb landed softly at first. David needed me to be the victim, the wronged wife, so he could claim emotional distress and collect a settlement. The first significant relationship damage wasn't between David and me. It was the realization that Mark had been a pawn, that Karen had been in on it, that my entire workplace had been stage managed into watching me commit a crime I didn't know I was committing. I became defensive when I finally understood, raging at David that this was entrapment, that he'd manipulated me into this position. He just kept typing, adding my outburst to the documentation. "You let him kiss you," David said calmly. "That's not manipulation, that's consent." The hidden action I'd taken earlier, texting David that screenshot of Mark's invite, trying to be transparent, was now proof of premeditation, of my seeking out the encounter. My fingerprints were all over my own noose. I tried to come clean the next day, marching into Mark's office to confess everything, but he just smiled that same cold smile and said, "Your husband called me this morning. We have a meeting with his lawyer on Thursday. I hope you understand this is just business." He was going to settle, pay David a chunk of his inheritance to make it go away, and I was the currency they were trading. The problem spiraled when Karen called me into her office and offered me the promotion, not despite the incident, but because of it. "A woman who knows how to create leverage is valuable," she said, sliding the contract across her desk. The worst decision I made yet was signing it, accepting the raise and the new title, because my rationalization had become so twisted. If I was going to be used, I might as well profit from it. By Thursday's meeting, I'd stopped sleeping. David's lawyer, a woman named Petra with sharp cheekbones and sharper suits, laid out their case with PowerPoint precision. Texts, timestamps, witness statements from coworkers who'd seen me flirting for weeks. Mark's lawyer advised him to settle quickly. I sat there, the supposed victim, and said nothing while David negotiated a figure that would pay off our mortgage and fund his new startup. The emotional unraveling started that night when I found David packing a suitcase. "I'm staying with my brother while this settles," he said. "For the paperwork, you understand, we need to establish separate residences." He kissed my forehead like a priest giving last rites, and I realized I was being discarded now that I'd served my purpose. I self-sabotaged by calling Mark at 2 a.m., sobbing that I was sorry that I hadn't known that David was the one who Mark hung up mid-sentence. And the next day Petra had a transcript of the call, using it to claim Mark was harassing me post-incident, adding another zero to the settlement demand. My support system crumbled when my sister, the one person I'd told everything, stopped returning my calls after David visited her with concerns about my mental state. Someone got hurt by my continued deception, me mostly, but also Mark, who lost his job when Karen restructured marketing after the settlement. The direct question came at 3 a.m. from a blocked number. "Did you know the whole time?" I couldn't answer because the truth was worse than either yes or no. The biggest revelation started when Petra accidentally CC'd me on an email to David. The subject line, "Co-conspirator immunity documentation." The body detailed the legal protections they'd secured for me, how I'd been cooperating as a material witness in the alienation of affection case. They'd been recording everything, not just Mark, but my sister's calls, my therapy sessions, even my conversations with Karen. The most damning detail was buried in the attachments: a contract between David and Karen, signed 3 months before the party, where Karen agreed to facilitate the incident in exchange for a percentage of the settlement. My promotion was literally written into the agreement as consideration for ongoing cooperation. The full confession that changed everything wasn't that I'd been innocent. It was that I'd become complicit the moment I cashed that first paycheck with the new salary. I hadn't known the whole plan, but I'd suspected enough, had seen enough cracks in the foundation, and I'd chosen to believe the comfortable lie, because the alternative was admitting my marriage was a business arrangement, and I was the product being sold. The fallout hit every quadrant of my life simultaneously. Petra filed a motion to have me removed as a plaintiff in the alienation suit, painting me instead as a willing participant in a fraudulent scheme. David countersued for divorce, claiming I'd been unfaithful, producing evidence that was technically real but contextually monstrous. My new job title became a liability. HR placed me on leave pending an investigation into unethical conduct. Social media amplified everything when a concerned coworker leaked redacted portions of the lawsuit to a local blogger. Strangers dissected my collarbones, the red silk dress, the timestamp on my texts. The unexpected consequence I hadn't anticipated was the criminal investigation. The district attorney's office opened a fraud case, looking into whether David and I had conspired to extort Mark. The moment of genuine self-awareness broke through during my voluntary interview with the detective, a kind-eyed woman who said, "You know, most victims don't get paid by their abusers." I started laughing and couldn't stop, because she was right and wrong, and everything in between. I'm telling this story now because yesterday David's lawyer filed a motion to have me declared a vexatious litigant if I try to contest the divorce terms, and I finally understand the architecture of the trap he built. The red dots on the calendar weren't about my fertility, they were a countdown to my erasure. Everyone still thinks I wanted Mark's kiss, that I was chasing some cheap thrill. What they don't understand is that I was trying to survive a marriage that had become a surveillance state, and I chose the wrong exit strategy. David got his lawyer, his settlement, his clean narrative where he's the wronged husband who generously forgave his wayward wife. Mark got his life destroyed and a non-disclosure agreement. Karen got her percentage and a new VP title. I got this story, which isn't a confession so much as evidence I'm submitting into the record of my own life. If you're reading this, you've probably already chosen a side, assigned blame like doling out candy. But here's what I learned: some kisses aren't about desire, they're about documentation. Some marriages aren't partnerships, they're Ponzi schemes. And sometimes the only thing worse than being a victim is realizing you helped build the cage you're sitting in. David texted me this morning, "Hope you're doing well." I haven't replied, but I took a screenshot. Someone